In this training video, we will perform some basic takeoff, and we'll also demonstrate some new features with takeoff that anyone can encounter on any given day. But before we perform some takeoff of data equipment and devices, it's a good idea to take a look at the phase tree to make certain that it is tailored to the project that we are bidding on. It also helps to organize the project as well. We can access the phase tree by clicking on the phase tree job spec section. As we can see, the phase tree is currently defined for electrical work and really does not pertain to data or low voltage work. Let's change the phase tree to suit our needs by first clicking on the Set Filter button at the top of the screen. This button lets us quickly filter the phase tree to our project and our needs. Currently, the filter is set to All, which will let us see all available phases that IntelliBid has to offer. If we uncheck All, we can now select the appropriate filter to use. DataBid will be a good filter to use to suit our purposes. We could also select Low Voltage as a filter. As we can see, filters can be used alone or together depending on how we want our phase tree configured. However, for this project, we'll select the DataBid filter and click the OK button. There we are. The phase tree is dramatically shortened and tailored to our project with the appropriate phases. Now, we can certainly go from here to the takeoff area and get the takeoff process underway. However, since this is a training video, let's take a minute or two to demonstrate for you how to add some subphases and levels. This project that we are bidding on has 2 buildings with 2 floors in each building. We'll need to add that structural information to the phase tree by using these buttons here. I must say at this point that, if possible, it is a good idea to break down the project by buildings and floors. Of course, if there's only one building, then we'll just use the floors. The reason for this is we will now have the capability of utilizing IntelliBid's detailed reports to their full potential. A detailed report can be generated for a breakdown of the material, labor, or both for a particular floor or building. Let's begin by adding the 2 buildings to the phase tree. First, we need to place a check in the Smart Fill box. We'll see what this checkbox will do for us in a minute. Now, all the initial folders that we can see are called phases. Typically, the default phases are sufficient for our needs, but if we see that something is missing, then we can easily add another phase by clicking on the phase button here. That will add more phases to the phase tree, but that will not be necessary for this training, so we'll start by adding the buildings. The next button is called Subphase, and will let us add the buildings to the phase tree. Click the button and name the subphase Building 101. Now hit the Enter key on the keyboard. There are 2 buildings in this project, so click on the subphase button once more and name that one Building 102. Enter. That's it for the 2 buildings. Now we'll move to the next button, Level. This button will allow us to add the 2 floors for each building. Click on Level and name that folder First Floor. Click Enter on the keyboard. Level button once again. Name that folder Second Floor. If we wanted to, we could go another step with the Sub-Level button, which would break down the floors into rooms or areas. We could call this sub-level, let's say, IDF 102-2, or Communications Closet, or something else to identify this particular room on the 2nd floor. This way, with IntelliBid's extensive reporting, we can see material and labor for just a particular IDF. Do you have to build out the phase tree in this fashion? No, you don't. I'm just showing you the possibilities that we have available to us with the phase tree. If we look at the phase tree, we can see the buildings, floors, and IDF that we added. To delete a folder, simply right-click and delete. Now, we'll have to add those buildings and floors to all the other phases. But not so fast. If you recall, before we added the subphases and levels, we checked the Smart Fill box. Let's see what happened. If we click on a small plus next to fiber backbone, there are the buildings. The plus sign again. There are the floors. So by checking the Smart Fill box before we create the phase tree, we can save ourselves plenty of time with typing. Okay, let's perform some data takeoff. We'll begin with the workstation cabling. Now, click the Takeoff button on the bottom right-hand corner. We're ready to do a takeoff. But before we do that, let me take a few minutes and show you some helpful features. In the takeoff area, before any takeoff is actually done, let's make certain that we are taking off the material in the proper area of the phase tree. Look above at the drop-down menus and we can see that the phase is set to Workstation Cabling. Next, we'll select Building 101 in the Subphase menu and the first floor in the Level menu. On the top right corner, we see two drop-down menus that we can utilize before beginning takeoff. The first is Vendor. With this drop-down, we have choices on how we'll price the material for this job. The pricing shown in the audit trail below depends on the vendor selected here. The first two vendors listed are Trade 3C, which is third column pricing from Trade Service, and Target, which is Trade Service's target pricing. It's pricing that comes very close to most of our vendors' item prices. Target is a default pricing structure with IntelliBid. By the way, these two options are included with the IntelliBid software. With that said, IntelliBid gives us the ability to keep our own item prices for up to 8 of our favorite vendors. We can enter our vendors' names into this drop-down menu through Maintenance, Items section, click the Vendor button, and enter our vendors here. The pricing for our vendors can be updated a couple of ways. It can be entered manually into the database, imported into the database from a text file given to us by our vendor, or even better, quick and easy price updates through the internet 24 hours a day from NetPricer or Trade Service. As we can see, I have a few of my favorite vendors set up with NetPricer, thus giving me access to their latest prices and more flexibility with my bid proposal. However, for training purposes, we can leave it at target pricing to get us close to the pricing we get from our vendor. Once we have selected which pricing structure to use for this job, we can select the labor level. The labor level is used to adjust our labor depending on the degree of difficulty for the job. The first labor level is ConEst. It is considered an aggressive level, based on ConEst's experience in the field as electricians, estimators, and data contractors. Labor 1 is a NICA level for a normal install. Labor 2 is a NICA level for a difficult install. And Labor 3 is also a NICA level for a very difficult install. Unused 5 and 6 are 2 extra levels that are customizable for our personal use. To give you an idea of the difference between ConEst labor level and NICA 1, NICA 1 will typically double the labor compared to the ConEst labor level. That's why we say that ConEst is the most aggressive of the labor levels. Keep in mind that these two settings pertain to the entire job. Okay, what if we have a job that's pretty straightforward and not too difficult, but there are a couple of areas on the first floor where the cables are run higher than usual? Or maybe a handful of drops are to be run in a more difficult situation than the others. We know that if the labor is set up here, it covers the entire job. Is there a way that we can add more labor to a part of the job and not the whole job? Yes, there is. Let's set the overall labor level to aggressive, that being ConEst. Now we need to take off 75 drops on the first floor that are run higher than most. So we need to add more labor to those drops. We can add that right here in Takeoff settings. This is where we can set our extra labor just for these cable runs. The Takeoff settings can be used for one item or many. These settings allow us to make adjustments to the material before we perform a takeoff for the first floor. The first setting is size. If we set the size to ½ inch, all conduit, elbows, fittings, and so on that we take off separately will automatically be selected for ½ inch size, thus saving us the time of searching and selecting for ½ inch material for this floor. The next option is material factoring. This lets us add a markup or mark down to the material being taken off on this floor. The material that's being taken off could be adjusted for difficulty of installation, discount pricing, or anything else we feel an adjustment in material pricing is needed. Keep in mind that we will have another opportunity to mark up the material in the bid recap section as well. However, we'll leave the setting at 1.00 without a markup or markdown. Next is labor factor. Like the material factor, we can raise up or lower the labor of these drops depending on difficulty of installation. Since these cable runs will be higher than the others at about 25 feet, we can adjust our labor up to, let's say, 1.10 or 1.15 for an extra 10 or 15% added to the labor difficulty for these cable runs on the first floor. It's also possible that we don't know what percentage to add for extra labor, and simply throwing a wild guess at the extra labor is common and can lead to underestimated time to install and thus loss of profits. Okay, we'll set the labor factor to auto and let IntelliBid assist us in determining the labor factoring by prompting us with a couple of extra questions in the calculator during takeoff. Lastly, the multiplier is typically used for multiple details. This option can be used for a job with similar units or rooms, such as a hotel or condo complex. This setting will not apply to our job, so we'll leave it set at 1.0, which is the default. Let me say this, these settings that we are adjusting now are for the first floor only, or whatever area we happen to be taking off. When we move to the second floor or to another area, we need to adjust the settings accordingly. Now that we have our vendor chosen, our takeoff settings adjusted, let's do a takeoff. In the lower half of the screen, we see an assortment of catalog areas, many of them with assemblies that are made up of all the equipment and material required for this installation. As we go along, you'll see how assemblies help speed up the takeoff process. The library filter is set up for DataBid, and the item library shows that we are ready to take off ISP assemblies. There are plenty of options for us: work area UTP, work area coax, fiber, mixed media, and much more. However, we'll begin with work area UTP. Within many of these catalogs, we'll find assemblies for the different types of installations. It's good to note here that catalogs with assemblies are denoted by a small yellow icon that looks like this. There are plenty of catalogs here, such as open cabling, conduit drops, old work, new work, on furniture, in furniture, and more. However, for our application, we'll select 4-port work area drops plenum. We are presented with an assortment of assemblies to choose from. Once again, let's take note that assemblies in a catalog have this little icon. It's good to know how to recognize an assembly as opposed to a single item, which we'll get to shortly. Let's see. We have voice, data, voice and data. Well, we'll select one voice, 2 data flush with a 4-port plate and Cat5 and Cat6 cabling. Once that is selected, a quantity calculator pops up to ask us a few questions. The first question is quantity. How many drops are we running to a particular location? Well, let's say we counted 75 drops on the north end of the first floor. With the mouse or keyboard, type in 75 and click the Enter Prompt button. The next question is average feet per run. Well, we figured the cable run from the IDF across the ceiling, down the hallway, and then drop down about 15 feet. So all in all, the average run would be about 175 feet. We'll enter 175. Now, typically, those 2 questions would be all we have. However, if you recall, before we performed this takeoff, we made adjustments to the takeoff settings and specifically the labor factoring when we set that to auto. IntelliBid will now assist us in determining the proper amount of labor required to install the cable runs at 25 feet up. Let's answer the questions. Floors above grade. Well, we're on the first floor. Enter prompt. Outlet mounting height. For these outlets, it'll be at about 18 inches, which is 1.5 feet. Enter prompt. Conduit cable mounting height. Well, that's going to be at 25 feet. Now, before we click the Enter Prompt button one last time, we have the option of identifying this cable run by adding a comment line in this box. It can be anything up to 255 characters. For example, we can identify this run as one voice, two data to north side offices. The checkbox just below will add a blank comment line at the bottom of the assembly. This blank line is used as a demarcation point in roll-up reports. It simply helps to identify where one assembly ends and the other begins. The button View Assembly is used to view the assembly and the parts and pieces that are included in the assembly before we take it off. This feature is included in IntelliBid Plus, Pro, and Design Build. It's an add-on module for IntelliBid Lite. Now we'll click the Enter prompt. There you have it, a complete assembly with all the material we need to install 75 voice and data outlets, and the comment line that identifies this cable run going to the north side offices. Besides adding a comment line as an identifier, it can be used for writing notes on a particular assembly. If we look at the gray comment line, there is a small white square on the right side of the line. Click on the small white square to reveal an input box, allowing us to add more notes regarding a particular assembly. Again, there is a limit of 255 characters on any notes written. Let's take a look at what we can do with our assemblies. The first line of an assembly is called the title line, or primary. We can easily tell that because it has a red square and blue lettering on the line. The remaining lines of the assembly are yellow, and these are called components of the assembly. An assembly is made up of many components to assist with the installation, some more than others. We can see with the components that we have everything we need to install the drops. Faceplates, labels, pull string, all the way down to patch cords. Looking at the material price column, we can see that there is some material with a monetary value and some without. The items such as the patch cords don't have a material value because it's assumed that these items are quoted items and that material price will be entered in the quote section once the pricing is received from our vendors. Also, assemblies have many columns with valuable information. We can see the quantity of items, unit of measure, material pricing, material and labor factoring, which represents a percentage markup or markdown on the material and labor. By the way, if we look at the labor factoring, it has blue numbers running down the column. The numbers are blue because IntelliBid automatically adjusted the labor for us. If you recall, the auto labor feature is turned on. If at any time we see blue numbers in the labor column, whether auto labor is on or off, we know IntelliBid is working for us automatically, tweaking the labor levels for accuracy with our labor. Also, any line item can be adjusted to our requirements. For example, if we think we need more pull string than is listed, click in the quantity column and make the change just to that line item. The material and labor columns can be changed as well. Pretty simple. However, one of the really unique features of an assembly is the capability to make global changes to the assembly itself. Okay, let's say we did a second visual pass on the drawing and notice that we have missed 5 drops when we initially did our counting. It doesn't make sense to take off another assembly with 5 drops. Why don't we change the assembly itself? In the quantity box on the comment line, change the 75 to 80, reflecting the extra 5 drops. Then, on the first line of the assembly, the title line, click the quantity box. An input box appears. It allows us to change the quantity of drops here, as well as the average foot per run, floors above grade, the mounting heights. This assembly recalc box allows us to make detailed changes to an assembly that we just took off. Let's add the extra 5 drops here for a new total of 80. Click OK. As quick as that, adjustments have been made to all the components of the assembly, and they are colored red to indicate a change has been made. As a matter of fact, anytime that we make a change in any of these columns, the new entry will be red. It's a nice indicator that someone has physically made changes to that line item. Remember, blue numbers indicates that IntelliBid automatically adjusted them for us, and red numbers indicates that a human physically made these changes. Let's take a look at some other features in the takeoff area. For that, we need to take off some more cable drops. We'll stay with the same assemblies. However, these drops are at a more reasonable height of 12 feet, so let's turn off the auto labor feature and make the decision to add another 5% labor ourselves. Now click on Work Area UTP, Work Area Drops, 4-port plenum, and we'll choose the same one as 1 voice, 2 data flush with Cat 5 and Cat 6. We'll place an identifying comment here and label these runs as 1 voice, 2 data to, this time, the south side offices. Well, look at this. We only have 2 questions in the calculator. That's because the auto labor factor is turned off. And with auto turned off, we lost 3 questions. What floor are we working on? And the mounting heights. Do you see the difference between auto labor and tweaking the labor factor ourselves? Okay, let's say we counted 55 drops. Enter prompt. Average foot per run was 180 feet. Enter prompt. There we are. We have another assembly. And if we look at the labor factor column, the numbers in this assembly are red. They are red because we intentionally set the labor factor to 1.05%. Now all the labor line items for this assembly are marked up 5%. What have we learned so far? Well, we've learned how to turn on the auto labor feature that, by asking a few more questions in the calculator, assist us in properly adjusting our labor. Also, that assemblies can make quick work of the takeoff process by including all the material we need to install voice and data jacks with just a few clicks of the mouse. We also know how to locate and identify an assembly in a catalog by identifying the yellow icon and the assemblies that follow. However, as amazing and time-saving as assemblies are, there will be times when we don't need an assembly for a piece of material or equipment. This is where single items come into play. Among the libraries and catalogs below, we'll also find single items. To locate a single item, click on a catalog section below like Unit Strut channel. What we see here looks like a green H. Actually, these are called headers, and they house the single items. There are plenty to choose from, and there are more right over here to the right side. Just scroll the screen to the right and view more selections. Now, if we click on the header, Unit Strut channel, we are presented with many single items at our disposal. Single items are identified by these 3 little small colored balls that look like a molecule. Now, there is a possibility that as we look around, we might not see what we're looking for. That's okay. Let's close out of here and look at other options that we have. If we look under the library filter called DataBid, we see the item library ISP assemblies. Pull down this menu to reveal many more library options. OSP assemblies, cable management, patch blocks and panels, and the list goes on. For this example, we'll select Cable Tray. Next, select the Catalog section, Hubble Premise. What we see here are headers again. So let's start with the ladder rack. We can see those colored balls indicating single items, and there's plenty to choose from here. Let's grab a 10-footer by 18 inches wide, and we'll use gray. The quantity calculator is asking for the quantity, or how many 10-foot sections that we really need. We should be good with, let's say, 250 feet, so that'll be, for 10-foot sections, 25 sections in all. We could add a comment line here for this item, but we'll leave that alone and uncheck the blank comment line as well. Again, these are optional. Click Enter Prompt. And there it is at the bottom of the audit trail. We can tell that this is a single item as opposed to an item that is part of an assembly because it is identified with a gray square at the beginning. Single items will always be identified with a gray square. We can continue selecting all the ladder rack assemblies with the next header, and so on, until all the material and equipment is taken off for the first floor. Now, in order to keep this video training short and sweet, we'll assume that we've taken off everything for the first floor, and we'll move on to the second floor and repeat the process. We'll look at the drawings for the second floor, count all the drops, average all the lengths, and notice that the second floor is pretty much the same as the first floor. Well, the first floor wasn't so bad, so we should be able to do the second floor even faster this time. Now, before we begin duplicating our efforts on the second floor, let's try something that will save us valuable time. Scroll the audit trail all the way up. Now go to the icon bar at the top of the screen and click on the red and yellow icon. Collapse and expand. This icon is useful in truncating assemblies so that they are easier to view. Next, click on the first line of the audit trail to highlight it. While holding down the Shift key on the keyboard, click on the last line in the audit trail. Now that we have all the items selected, right-click with the mouse button and select Copy. A pop-up box will ask if we would like to copy just the title line or primary of the assembly. Now remember, that's the first line of an assembly. We don't want just that line. We'll select the second option and click OK. And OK once more. We had to OK that twice because of the two assemblies. Now let's go to the Level drop-down menu and select the second floor. Right-click anywhere in the audit trail and select Paste Append. Append places the items at the bottom of the list in the audit trail, and Insert places the items above the highlighted line in the list. Well, in this case there isn't a list, so either one will work. A pop-up box appears asking us if we would like to make adjustments to the material and labor factoring, or the multiplier, before we paste the assemblies down. We'll leave it as it is and click OK. There you have it, a duplicate audit trail of the first floor. It's fast and easy when we have to copy and paste. What happens if some of the drops or some of the other material quantities are different than the first floor? Okay, we can expand the audit trail by clicking on the Expand and Collapse icon at the top. Now take a look at the quantities that we currently have for the data drops and material. Then compare them to the drops and material quantities that we have for the second floor. If we need to make changes to the data drops, remember that we can click on the title line of an assembly and make the adjustments here. The quantities can be adjusted up or down, and the average foot run can also be adjusted for the second floor if it's longer or shorter. Now don't forget to check the single gray line items for the other material we took off also. Those are adjusted separately. There you have it. You now know how to create a phase tree to conform to the project at hand, and how to navigate through the phase tree from the audit trail by changing the phases as you go along. You also learn how to use the auto labor feature, as well as how to identify assemblies, where and how to find them, and how to make them work for you. Don't forget the single items and how to identify those as well. We also learned how to expand and compress the audit trail and how to save time by copying and pasting assemblies and material from one area to another. But with all that said, one of the most important things that you can take away from this training is IntelliBid is loaded with assemblies and single item material within many libraries and catalogs. Use the item libraries to locate the material that you need, and don't be afraid to look around and poke through the catalogs for what you need. The more you get familiar with the libraries, the easier it will be to perform a takeoff.